It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello friends, I am Rob. Welcome to my State of the Dungeon address. We had an excitedly spirited time in Munich, Germany for the Mighty Protectors game at GiftedCon. Everyone loves GiftedCon. It's what would happen if the world suddenly woke up to superheroes. And this is still only the very first month that superheroes have been in existence, and the entire world has been flipped on its ear. Even in the process of dealing with the coronavirus, there are wonders happening that stepped right out of the pages of comic books, and people are reacting. So, there was this what would have been a Comic-Con-like fest in Germany that somebody threw a lot of money into, got a lot of sponsorships, and suddenly turned it into GiftedCon, where they had an open invitation for anybody with superpowers to come and be a part of it. One of the big sponsors was Supers, which is a company that was founded by P. Diddy, which the players are just so infatuated with. But as far as a style mogul, his name is on a lot of stuff, and was a believable celebrity that he would fully be a part of this. So as a result, there is a big presence of people who are there to make sure that the supers are protected and have a good time, and that people can have contact with them. And again, normal people can walk around shoulder to shoulder with modern-day superheroes. They're normal people with powers, which makes the world, I think, a little bit more interesting, rather than, you know, the Archduke of Stelex 9, whose rigid code of honor knows no evil and tolerates no wickedness. No, they're just normal folks, with all the temptations and trials that come with being normal folks. And the group are all people who have gone through those share of trials and issues. They've already been betrayed by an employer. They are currently kind of working for a shadow branch of the government to try to use their powers to help people and enjoy a little bit of freedom from the normal boundaries that would come if you could, knock a skyscraper over. So they're kind of protected in that way. Unfortunately, Muscle's player couldn't show up, which is unfortunate. It really wasn't that catastrophic, however, because basically this entire night was spent at a big party. That's the whole adventure, was one party. But it was a heck of a party. See, there were obviously the day-to-day things that took place at the convention, lots of meet and greets, seminars to help people, and things like that. Well, Supers sponsored a big bash, inviting many of the supers to show up, all the gifted, and a very strict VIP list. You could get in for the right price. Let's face it, somebody made a lot of money off of this. But all the while, there's, again, superheroes getting to be superheroes. And some people who aren't really very heroic, but still being adored and admired by all these people who wish they had superpowers. So the group got to choose how they were going to make their entrance into this party. And for the most part, things went pretty much as I expected. For instance, Cygos went in costume, and people were like, "Oh, you're great." Rook went in costume, and people noticed him, but he's always been kind of standoffish and does not exactly radiate embracing a social media presence. Sentinel stuck with his shtick of being duplicated and sending his dupe in full costume out to wow the fans, while he was in his normal everyday attire. His identity is not known to the masses, so he was able to go somewhat incognito, but he's still allowed in, of course. Oddly enough, Bulwark, whose sister was too tired and was not a part of this adventure, because honestly I didn't want him shackled to her the whole time, and she didn't make her endurance save, so she's tired. He went in normal clothes, and because he blew his cool roll so badly coming in, people just thought he was the laziest cosplayer of Bulwark, and just dissed him. They're like, "Fix your makeup, you tool." It's like, oh. So he was completely ignored by most people going in, despite the fact he's got VIP tags. Yeah. That was actually rather funny, considering he's one of the most famous gifted. The first person to come out and pull off his mask and say, "Hey, I'm Takeshi. I'm gifted. We're in your world, and you're gonna have to deal with us." It was pretty epic when he did this, and now it comes to the public presence, and nobody pays attention to him because he's in normal clothes, and people just think he's just a bad cosplayer. Hilarious. So, again, the group had their different reactions. Of course, Sentinel was mobbed. He was rolling ones like crazy, and he was just mobbed by all these people throwing their attention at him. It's been, he cuts a pretty good figure in his costume, so his duplicate was getting bombarded with propositions and just, throngs. The folks from Supers were trying their best to keep people away so that he wasn't completely, drowned in admirers. But, it was still pretty obvious who everybody was flocking to. And of course, they were sharing this party with all these other Supers, so some were also getting quite a bit of attention. For example, Lady Aphrodite was there, but they had a cordon of people to stop folks from diving at her because she was fine with being super cool, and her enhanced cool and emotion control powers are just a brutal two-part in this game. There's she won't ever have to get into very many fights, we'll just put it that way. She'll be able to disarm most people, but with her abilities, it was definite that she was going to get a lion's share of the attention from people. To wit, the group actually did a pretty good job of resisting her passive wiles. And to the point where even Cyghost rolled brilliantly and's like, well, you know what? She's wearing tummy tucker. She's not that pretty. Her powers are definitely helping, but I'm pretty awesome too, so, work it, sister, but, Sentinel, however, did not. His ones ended there, and while he didn't roll a 20, he was still sucked in by her emotion control, and he had a VIP pass. And he got through the cordon. He's like, you're pretty. And he completely lost his ability to really talk and everything. He was really smitten with her powers, and she probably was more amenable to him than almost anybody else, but it was pretty clear that he was reduced to goo, and she finally just told people, just take him away, please. And they did. Which is when they started wondering, how come all these people who work for Supers aren't being affected by her powers? Because they're not doing all of this, and it seems like many people can't help themselves. Every single one of them had no problem with her. Who knows? They didn't really pursue that one. Rook, at this point, was kind of in his own situation where he didn't want to deal with people. He didn't want to deal with the media, and he didn't want to be mobbed. There were a couple of people who came up and they were like, hey, you're awesome. There were admirers. Of course, he was in costume, so he was going to get some attention. He had somebody who came up and said, your original costume was so much better. Just being a dork. That's when his vindictive streak came out. Anybody who annoyed him, he immediately plundered into their IDs on their phone and started signing them up for all kinds of weird and semi-legal stuff to just mess with them. And he did this a couple of times to people who annoyed him, who really kind of irked him. Which is hilarious because he's developed his powers to the point where he can do that almost at the speed of thought. So he's dangerous in that way. Anybody who had a cell phone on them was a potential target for being loaded up. And, Takeshi was kind of enjoying the fact that he could look around and see everybody and do stuff without being mobbed. Of course, being in Germany, he was able to drink, but he controlled himself. He wasn't, too bad. And eventually he did find a gal from CNN who was doing an interview. She was interviewing Mr. Zombie, who is another Supers, the immortal man who cannot die. And he gave her an interview, but he blew his cool roll, and it came off as being okay. He did resist her attempts to try to pry useful information about what the group had been up to, so he didn't, break security clearance or anything, but it was quite clear that he didn't have a great deal to say, and he wasn't in a position where he was going to make a statement or anything. So, she realized that it was nice, but okay. Just okay. And Cyghost at first was kind of interested in, just hanging around with Hank. Hank DeVille, as they're now calling him, Devil's Advocate. He doesn't like the name very much, but he can't help his looks, so. But Hank took off. Hank vanished out from, and considering his powers, that's not hard. She was a little annoyed at that. Apparently she had designs on Hank. But Hank is a working man at his heart, and he had things that he wanted to do with all these potential connections that his position gave him. So he ditched her, basically. The devil is kind of fickle, what can I say? But the devil is in the details. Yes, every devil pun is coming out for this. I do love Hank so much. He was a joy to put together. However, she was looking for some friends, and she found one. Cyghost found a new soulmate, sort of. She met up with Canonus. Canonus is a nun from Louisiana who developed the power to make sonic booms and powerful blasts. About the strength of getting hit with a cannon, quite honestly. So they got the Supers company got her a suit which showed some respect. She's a large woman, and she's a black superheroine, which comes with its own. But she is very outgoing and bombastic. I love playing her. She's great, and she's like, "Come on, girl, we're gonna go hit the dance floor." And she's a good dancer. Cyghost is not. Cyghost is a lab rat, so she kind of got pulled out of her comfort zone, but she wanted a friend. And quite honestly, those two had a good time together. Canonus was not looking for, finding men or anything like that. She was looking for a good time, and she found one in Cyghost. She also kept off most of the pests who were trying to, well, let's just face it. Cyghost walks around in skin-tight armor. Some guys, think that's very attractive. And as a result, there was some, attention she was getting from some of the fans. Canonus shooed away the more obnoxious ones with her with a style that you just can't copy. And she warmed up. The two formed a bond pretty quickly, which was funny. They spent a lot of the night together. So, all the different levels of things were going on throughout the night. Basically, they made their entrance, they found out their reaction. The guys from Supers wanted to know how they wanted to deal with media. And again, most of them stayed away from media, so that wasn't something. At different stages of this, they had different things that they could really do. And, how much alcohol they wanted to drink, for instance. Nobody got completely plowed, and some of them stayed away from too much alcohol, which is fine. Certainly, that could have made a different direction for the night, but it's fine. Eventually, however, different people had different things they wanted to do. Sentinel had so many offers that eventually he allowed his duplicate to succumb to temptation, and he took a very willing lass to a VIP lounge for a little personal attention from Sentinel. And, they carried on with the act. However, as they were finished with the act, he suddenly felt a pain, and she had jabbed him with a hypodermic needle and stuck him with something. Where she had the needle, he didn't know. What was in it, he didn't know. But he made his initial endurance roll, and she seemed out of it. Completely blank. So even though she's, in a complete state of undress, she's nothing. No explanation to offer why she did it, who she did it for, anything. Well, Sentinel quickly got dressed before whatever she injected him with took him over, did anything to him, took the hypodermic with him, and took off, leaving her there. And went to go find somebody for some help. Now remember, he had a duplicate, and his duplicate knew what had happened. So his duplicate, or the original, you can make your own mind up. We like to think that the one in plain clothes was the original. Realistically, there's not much separating the two. Went over to Bulwark and said, "I was attacked." And he explained the situation, and Bulwark's like, well, what'd you stick you with? He's like, I don't know. So they met up with the duplicate, now again disheveled, but you know, and he gave them the needle, and he's like, well, it's a little bit of purple residue inside of it. We have a chemist in our team. So they went and they found Ghost. So Psy-Ghost was there, and they're like, we need to go and deal with this. So they explained the situation to her. Now in the middle of all this, there was a fight. This fight was interesting because it involved Hank. Hank was fighting with another super called Seraph. Seraph is not his nemesis, but he has a similar theme. He's got wings and can fly, and he can create light that he can strobe out. He can also use it as an attack. It's not nearly as devastating as the fire blast that his actual nemesis has. And Hank was not too worried about this guy. He realized that he was on a completely different power level. So while he was being attacked, he would just teleport away and make a cutting comment rather than just blasting this fool. While the attacks were going on, Rook noticed, and he increased the gravity on Seraph, which increased everything, and increased the weight of his clothes and caused him to bind up his wings, and he went splat. I mean, Seraph looked like he was fairly impressive, but any one of the group could beat him. With a possible exception, no, every single person in the group could easily beat Seraph. He's a gamma level super. But he could be very annoying. And for some reason, he's got a fixation on fighting evil. Apparently his transformation was something that's in the deep part of his character. He thinks that there's good and evil for him to beat. Evil for him to drive out. And when he saw Hank, he immediately started to fight. Now, Hank was just defending himself. So the fight carried forward, and he landed, and the Seraph was ready to keep trying to attack, and he basically just got knocked out for the result. The group worked to protect everybody. Bulwark was ready to throw up force fields to stop people from getting hurt in the superpower duel. The entire place rippled as Paradigm's effect took place to keep everybody safe. But those initial fights were actually, no punches were pulled. It could have been pretty dangerous. So, fortunately, Hank kept his cool and didn't play out his hand on what he's capable of doing. So he got everything done he wanted to do. Now, another thing that really kind of drove things forward was another conversation that happened in the middle of this. And this was Rook, who really wasn't networking, but he could sense that there were sentient minds slithering through the different communication webs, similar to what he can do. And he's like, I want to contact one of those. So he did, and he met another gifted called AI. AI has really good powers with computers, some power with communications, although Rook is more powerful than that. But he has a lot of diversity and finesse in what he does. The guy initially had a really good background with computers anyhow, which gives him some advantage over Rook, who is just kind of winging it through natural ability. To the point where he actually offered to teach him a few tricks, and did so. So he finished his training on learning how to filter from looking for individual things out of massive streams of media, which Rook seems to keep finding himself in, and this will be very useful for him going forward. But this person AI is mercenary. He works for pay. He is working for, he didn't exactly say who he's working for, quite honestly, but he did make plenty of hints that he could be very useful if he's paid right or given something that he needs, and that simply Rook didn't have anything for him to answer all the questions that Rook has. But he did tell him that Hank would be able to provide some useful information about what the goings-on that are actually happening behind the scenes at GiftedCon. Well, they immediately wanted to have a conversation with Hank, and since he was just pulled out of the super fight, looking pretty cool doing it, they're like, hey, we need to talk. And Hank's like, okay, we can talk. So they went back to the hotel. Hank started telling them about what he had been doing. While they were all at the party, he was networking with people. He was getting face-to-face time, using his VIP pass to get in and talk to people that you normally wouldn't. He was going to start investigating the government side of things and the influences, but from what he gathered, because he's very good at investigation as part of his legal profession, investigation is one of his backgrounds, that there's a number of groups that are operating under the surface that are using the con for their own purposes. Whether they're the ones bankrolling it or not, they're not sure. He was not able to find the identity of the people who are bankrolling it. But he knows that there are several groups that are interested, including several of the biggest governments in the world that are individually trying to pluck people for their own nefarious purposes, potentially nefarious. And for example, he identified that the German government was actively recruiting. The British government and the United States government were actually recruiting the gifted for their own uses. They weren't, however, going to very well compete with a private sector who could offer fame. They were more interested in locking them up for their services that only they could provide. So he's pinpointed a couple people in the orientations they were already going into, so they'll have a nice little info dump when they start the next session. But they also found out that there were certainly people from the organization they just finished bloodying the nose of, and while they didn't have a battle suit presence or anything, just to keep their eyes open because they're going to hold a grudge, and if they can stir anything up against the group, they probably will. So that's always fun. Smash is a fun group. But also that there's another group that's even deeper into it and being even more active in recruiting, and that is the secret group Ramses, which is basically made up of rich kids and influential movers and shakers in the world who are trying basically to use the presence of the gifted to advance their own means of controlling the world and remaking some things, righting some wrongs that they don't like, and things like that. And as a result, they're kind of, more nefarious. They're subtle. They know subtlety, and they know power, and they're better at manipulating without seeming to be too obvious. And I think members of the group are really kind of starting to suspect they might be a bigger menace than Smash was, despite the fact, they don't use battle suits and stuff. So they know that this group is there and that they're creating some problems. They also found out that there's been some disappearances. 5 of the gifted who came into the convention are missing, including, a couple of them have noticed, their friend Doorman hasn't been seen since the opening of GiftedCon. So that's, and I was called out on a mistake. Ogre, another of the gifted that they met when they were signing into GiftedCon, he went missing, although I mistakenly had them see him at the U.S. Gifted dinner, special VIP dinner. I screwed that up. It was supposed to be Mr. Muscle, who's another gifted, but I didn't. I screwed up. I just screwed up. That's what happens sometimes. I really wanted the first meeting with Mr. Muscle and Muscles to be at Muscles Q&A, and yeah, I made a mistake there because Ogre was not present for that. But sometimes we have to admit our mistakes. So they're immediately interested. Now, disappearances are a totally different step up from just, subversion and, networking. So they wanted to pounce on this. So they tried to get Rook to go and, investigate the security processes, but Rook was thrown out by a superior gifted who was running Overwatch. Matter of fact, gave him a nasty gram of a little old lady going to him. So he went back to AI. He seems to like using AI as his go-to for things going on here in Munich, and he revealed that the security for the place is run by a gifted called Techno. Techno is a different gifted in that his powers really took on a visible presence. Now, many of the gifted don't themselves physically look drastically different, but there's some that really have. Obviously, Muscles is a classic example of that. Techno looks a lot like Cyborg from DC. Parts of him have just been replaced by metal. He's got a red robotic eye. He's got metallic flesh over one arm and one leg. But in his case, he's got a machine mind now that he can process things amazingly quickly, but it seems to have dampened his humanity. So when they got to talk to him, which AI facilitated, apparently AI is being generous and doing some things without getting paid, although he did actually charge payment for that. He asked for an autographed picture of Cyghost and got it. Cyghost was willing, so now he's got a picture of her. He's probably gonna, probably for a friend or something, of course, or maybe he's just keeping them on file. Who knows? AI is, well, they don't know him very well, so I don't know. But they got to talk to Techno, and Techno explained to them that he runs security, but his terms of his contract are very well spelled out. He's getting paid by the Supers Corporation and another, he understands that it's a numbered Swiss bank account. He doesn't understand who the employer is and is instructed not to, so he doesn't. He has to use the facilities that they've given him, which is a bank of security cameras, but he's acknowledged that some of the security cameras have been compromised. He's not getting full view of what he's supposed to be watching. And he's, again, as part of his employment, he's not allowed to worry about that. He just is concentrating on what he can do. And you have to think, this has been pretty clean so far, so he is doing a pretty good job. He is competent, but it sounds like he's hamstrung in some areas. In this case, the group is now very interested in who is doing this, because whoever is compromising the security is, they've reasoned, almost certainly the one who is taking Gifted. And while they haven't been attacked because they've been surrounded by crowds of adoring fans or whatnot, some of these folks have been. And not all of them are all that powerful, but it's troubling. So they went about to get security footage. Techno was not able to give them full security, but they were able to get a 45-minute trace on what each of the Gifted who was taken were doing before, up to the point where they were last seen on cameras. And it always seemed like they stepped out of one camera view and into what another camera should be covering, and they never made it to the other camera. Which made them realize that either this group knew where the camera angles were coming and they hit them before they could reestablish on security. It's an interesting theory, certainly, and they were prepared to pursue it. So they needed to find out how the cameras had been compromised, what was going on with them, because quite clearly there were also some people who just couldn't be viewed. Their own old friend Slade that they met the other day was just an example of this, who was, of course, Warbridge's henchman. And they're suspicious that Warbridge himself might be footing this. He's obviously very wealthy and has pull and influence with people in governments and high places. So yeah, he could be doing all of this too. So, in order to find out more information, they went to get one of the cameras. Techno told them, you can't take the cameras down and I can't let you alter them. It's part of my responsibility. Well, you can't really tell that to Bulwark. He's not going to listen. So he decides he's going to go get a screwdriver and try to take one off. Techno knew what he was doing and called in security to stop him. A guy from Super said, please don't do that. That would be violating your agreement for being here. We don't want to do that. We don't want to throw you out. He's like, okay. So he ran away. He took off. And while he was trying to evade pursuit, he dashed into a room and just rolled. He walked into a cosplay judging contest, and he ended up winning for best cosplay as himself, which is funny. But yeah, it's awfully hard to keep Bulwark down. So eventually he flew, made himself intangible, and increased his density, which cancels his flight, while he was grabbing one of the cameras and pulled it out of the wall. And then just took off. He went flying again, and as security was coming after him. So now, technically, he's kind of a fugitive for damaging this private property, but, yeah. So after doing all of this, they went back and they started analyzing the camera. They even called in Techno to say, there's this black box in here. What's this? And Techno's like, I I know what it is. I can't tell you how it got there. They found out that the manufacturer was a South Korean company called Seiwu that makes things for security. And this basically what it did was it was able to subvert the optics so that it could edit digital information. And it could also, in pulses, send out records of what the camera had recorded. Again, sending it somewhere through a separate Wi-Fi network overlay. Not the main convention one, or most of the private ones that they knew of. Since it was on a burst, it wasn't one that was always in operation, so it really would be tough to trace. But now the group had something to sink their teeth into, trying to find the source of the signal which would possibly lead them to the people who were behind the disappearances. Now, this means they're no longer at the party. This also meant that poor Sentinel was still undergoing the effects of the stuff he was shot up with. Now, it started to make him sleepy. They tried to get Sygos to analyze it. They actually went to the university in Munich. She flubbed the role badly. So she wasn't able to analyze it, and she botched the diminutive sample that she had. So they really had no idea of what was going on, other than there was a narcotic, a sedative in it. And again, Sentinel was doing a really good job of fighting it off. He was making all of his endurance rolls, no problem. But eventually they're like, you know, if you remerge your two parts, you go from one guy being completely awake and one guy who's suffering from this to sharing the burden, and all of a sudden now you might be able to, you know, resist it better. And so they merged, and I gave him another endurance roll and he failed that one, so now he really started to get sleepy. The other happy surprise is that Veronica showed up. Veronica heard that there were some problems, obviously, going on with the con, and she red-eyed it to Munich using her pole. She shows up about this time. She's like, okay, well, you're feeling groggy. Here's a stimulant. She carries a few interesting things in her purse. And she talked to them, got the lowdown on what was going on. And she immediately started to set things in motion. She explained to them that 4 of her agents that were there doing some recruiting of her own and scouting out the competition and finding out what was really going on, the kind of things that Hank was already doing, she wanted to do for herself. And she knew that the group, while they're good-hearted and their powers make them formidable, aren't spies. Not by a long shot. So, although a couple of them could definitely develop those talents, they're not there yet. So, nor are there really their inclinations that way either. But they basically took a quick cat nap while everybody was doing, you know, the running around and the research and stealing cameras and the like. And really that sets them up for the next step, where they try to find out what's really going on at Gifted Con. All the while, they did get to meet some people through the night. They met Mr. Universe. Mr. Universe is a relatively small, unassuming man with, you know, wearing a tweed jacket and glasses, who has the ability, when somebody is acting, oh, that's what happened to Seraph Dur. Mr. Universe came up, touched him, and sent him off to Bangkok. He apparently can do that. So he doesn't look like a Mr. Universe, but good PR. He apparently suffers under his own nickname. But he seems like a nice enough guy. And he's giving a seminar on Nemesis tomorrow. So some of the group are really interested in that, because they don't have who everybody's nemesis is, and they're definitely interested to find out on what goes on. So they met him. They met Mr. Zombie, or at least Bulwark did. Mr. Zombie's kind of a sad story. He's a guy who got his superpowers as his plane was going to crash. And his superpower is that he really can't die. He can always keep regenerating any tissue, even past the point where his body would be dead. By eating human tissue, he heals himself. So when his plane crashed, technically he died, but he got better because he was able to eat the bodies of the other crash victims. kind of harsh. He was dealt a pretty tough blow. He escaped from the U.S. government, who had him in a lab. He was recovered, and they were doing all sorts of fun experiments on him. You know, the usual horrible ideas that people have of being a victim of the government doing research. But he escaped. So now he's on the run from the U.S. government, and he was asking for some sort of asylum or help or advice from Bulwark, and who was trying to be genuinely helpful. But this guy is known to the U.S. government, and they want him back. They want to turn him into a super soldier, an unkillable soldier. The only problem is he's an insurance salesman. He's not interested. So, one of those things. So they met a couple of other supers, especially Canoness, made an impression on them. And her powers are pretty impressive, too. But all in all, it was a good night for networking. It was a good night for them getting to be their characters at a big party, high profile. And yeah, all in all, was a pretty good night. The group really didn't get in any fighting. I largely credit that to Muscles, player not being here. He probably would have spoiled for some sort of a fight, or probably would have punched the poor girl who was driven into sedating poor Sentinel. Oh, forgot that. The thread with her is that she was still unresponsive when somebody else went in to use the room, and she was basically taken to a ballroom and they tried to treat her, but she's in kind of a vegetative state. Part of the investigation they did, Cyghost went to try to contact her using telepathy to find out that she is blank. There's no mental process going on at all. Her brain's still working to keep the body going, but she's not thinking at all. Not even dreaming. And the ninja showed up to offer to help her get in, because he's helpful. Even though they tease him horribly. I mean, you know, Cyghost taunted him because he wasn't out looking for a date for the night, and he was eating a big sausage, and he's like, I'm not interested. She's like, yeah, well, I see how you're holding that sausage. Ha-ha. He'd offered to get her in, and she did not take him up on his offer, because he wanted to show how cool he was, and she didn't trust him. So they also got to meet. So anyhow, she went and observed her. They eventually got permission to let her look at the gal, and found out that there is a cocoon of anti-psi around her, which may have something to do with how she is being, mentally comatose. But they weren't able to determine how. Eventually, Veronica did suggest that maybe Bulwark do an examination, find out if there's something technological that's stopping her, because that's the kind of thing Veronica might think of. And they also met a couple other supers along the way. They met Sugar Rush, who is a constantly abuzz with energy, and he can't turn his powers off. They kind of felt sorry for him after hearing about that. But he was flying around the room wanting to meet every gifted, which was cool. So yeah, all in all, productive night. So thank you for joining me on this ride. I am Rob, and this has been another State of the Dungeon address. Next, day 2 of Gifted Con. What surprises will be in store? The players are now on the hunt to find out what's going on and how this mystery is unfolding. So join me, will you? And 2 weeks' time, we'll unravel this mystery together. Thank you very much. Until then, I'm Rob. Farewell.